everybody, this is Angela Savage, the daughter of IndyCar driver Swede Savage. It's time to watch stories from motorsports. My buddy, Doug Kenny, loves to share the journey of people in racing, and he is an amazing dude. Drivers, owners, fans, and team members, watch the SFM podcast.
Hey everybody, this is Doug Kenny from Stories from Motorsports. I'd like to thank my buddy Josh Mabe for the YouTube work he did years ago that inspired me to create this platform. I'd like to thank my buddy Victor Sifton for convincing me to get back into it after my hiatus from 2017 to 2019. I have a very special treat for you all today with an amazing journey from an amazing racing figure. Drivers, start your engines. So speaking of Goodyear, one of the funniest things that happened to me in Nashville a few times was whenever I brought up Goodyear, some people were confused as to the tire brand or Scott Goodyear.
Right.
And Scott Goodyear was a road racer as well, you know.
He was, and a good one. Another graduate of the Atlantic Series. Scott was a good Atlantic racer, clearly a good IndyCar racer, and did some sports car stuff as well, and a good broadcaster. You know, Scott had a really interesting career because I knew him, but I always, I might be completely out to lunch, but it would be interesting for a guy like you to interview him, because I always sensed that he was a little unfulfilled, and maybe that has to do with losing a close one at Indy. That might do it to you. But I always felt like he might be one of those guys that had things just been a little bit different here and there, that his ceiling would have been higher than what he ended up achieving, and taking nothing away from what he did, because I always thought he was a great driver. And that's the one thing that's interesting is we're not always in control of our results and our destiny. A lot of time, not that anyone else other than fate might be, but things don't always work out. But I always felt like he probably was probably a better talent than what the results showed.
Yeah,
I wouldn't call him underrated, but I would say that I think that he had a higher ceiling than what he achieved through no fault of his own. That's just life, circumstance.
Yeah, for sure. I do remember he was very great at broadcasting, just as good as he was behind the car. And there's been a handful of drivers, that probably that deserved more than what they ended up getting.
Well, the first guy on my list of that is Price Cobb. Price Cobb was in the 1970s a great Atlantic driver, and in the 80s a great Atlantic driver, and ultimately got to drive some really cool cars. He had some success in the IMSA days in the 80s with Dyson Racing, and he hooked onto a couple other pretty legit drives as well, and finally sort of got to the pinnacle of the sport, albeit later in his years, but this was a guy that was, and you'd have to ask ask Bobby Rahal how good Price Cobb was, and so we all know what Bobby achieved, and he raced against Bobby and Gilles Villeneuve, and a lot of guys would tell you back in the 70s, a lot of guys would tell you that Price was better than Bobby, he was better than Gilles, and I don't know. It sort of reckons back to what we talked about Aldo. Like, how many of those stories are there? There's a lot of them, but it didn't work out that way. But Price Cobb was a great driver that, for whatever reason, just had to wait until it was kind of too late.
Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please hit like and subscribe if you did so, and please continue supporting our amazing guest. And everybody, we'll see you next time on SFM.
Hi, this is Ted Warner speaking. While the checkered flag is waved for this program, stay tuned for next week for the next episode of SFM. Thanks to Doug Kenny for what he does for motorsports.